24 million people will be affected yearly of cancer by 2035. That is the conclusion of this year's World Health Organization cancer report, and which means that a majority of them, according to the report, will come from developing countries. A plus burden to the United Nations Population Fund, which is seeking to deliver a world where every pregnancy is needed. The potential of every young man should be fulfilled and every birth should be saved. But in a world where resources, especially financial, are becoming scarce, can the United Nations Population Fund still deliver? My guest today comes from the United Nations headquarters in New York. Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Fund for Programming, Australian Kate Gilmore. Welcome to Globewatch.
Thank you so much.
The International Labour Organization states that globally 75 million youths are out of the job market, aged between 15 to 25. Thousands of children are sexually assaulted by the Catholic establishment. That is according to the United Nations again. And you have millions of others suffering across the world. When you hear such blistering figures, are you saddened, traumatized, or sickened?
I'm all those things, but I'm also so hopeful and so optimistic. And let me tell you why. For each of those figures, which are true, and they cause us great sorrow, there are figures that tell a story of achievement, of success and of hope. Across this great continent of Africa, for example, maternal mortality is reducing. The number of women who die from preventable causes when giving birth, that's going down.
27% reduction.
It's extraordinary. Across this great continent, compound growth is running at a higher rate than in China. Across this great continent, we have stronger systems of governance and participation by citizens than before the Millennium Development Goals were struck in the year 2000. And it reminds us that despair is not an option. Yes, there are challenges ahead, but there is great potential and great hope. And the greatest of that hope rests in the young people of whom there are more today than have ever been in all of human history.
Correct. This is how the United Nations Population Fund prides itself, to have a world where every pregnancy is wanted, every birth is safe, every young person's potential is fulfilled. We are at a period of economic morosity. The problems of the World Population Fund seems to outnumber its resources. How will you deliver in such a situation?
The United Nations as a family never delivers on its own, and the United Nations Population Fund is no exception. We deliver in partnership. We deliver in partnership with governments all around the world. With more than 140 governments, we actively engage in policy dialogue, in program delivery, in enabling services to be provided in local communities. Furthermore, we do it in partnership with civil society, with charities, with philanthropic organisations, with organisations that people organise for themselves to ensure that their own human rights are upheld, are respected and protected. So, yes, our resources are not as we would wish them to be, but they never will be. It's partnership is our greatest resource. Do you want everybody to behave like the Netherlands, if my statistics are correct, was your best contributor years back and even last year? The most important thing for every government to do is invest in their own people and to find the safest and quickest pathway to that investment. We want to see a shift in budgets. We want to see money spent on education. We want to see money spent on health. We want to see money invested in young people to transform the future of local communities. That's the most important thing. Far more important than which UN agency gets what grant.
Okay, the United Nations Population Fund principally uses two tools to achieve all what you are saying, focusing and streamlining the Millennium Development Goals and going back to the Cairo Consensus of 1994. How have you been trying to expand these, especially when it comes to reproductive health, the raison d'etre of your presence in Yaoundé?
Thank you so much. The Millennium Development Goals, which only have 700 days left to deliver, are lagging behind for women and for young people. And it means we have a big challenge to address in the next 2 years. But thanks to the review of the Cairo Consensus, as you refer, and it's now 20 years old, thanks to the review that we've undertaken and will present to the United Nations this year, we have the opportunity to accelerate change for women and young people. And we have the chance to say to every government in the world, if you want a more sustainable society, a more inclusive society, if you want something that's fairer, that doesn't have these huge gaping gaps between the rich and the poor, invest in young people, first and foremost.
You are talking investing in young people, but there is one group of them which is vulnerable. And I want to quote last year's report of the state of the global population, 2013, which is the latest. And somewhere it is stated that 20,000 girls every 20,000 girls in developing countries every day put to birth a child. And now if you calculate that, it should be around 7 million annually. What is the cause of all of this, especially in developing countries? I saw you at the Yaoundé meeting hammering so much on the cultural factor, that no cultural value of this nation should permit all of this. How serious is the issue?
You know, the adolescent mother, the mother who, well, the adolescent girl who becomes pregnant and gives birth, her risks of dying in pregnancy are 4 times greater than for an older woman. The risks that her child, her newborn baby, will not see their first birthday is 5 times higher than if that child were born to an older person. But that young woman, that adolescent child, that girl under 15, she doesn't get pregnant out of the air. She gets pregnant because of the behaviour of another person about whom we do not speak often enough. 90% of those girls who get pregnant at the hands of a husband. 90% of them in developed world are already married. How can this be? And this connection between motherhood and childhood and early and forced marriage is threatening the lives, literally. This is a life and death issue for millions of young women across the world. It is a complicated issue.
How is it complicated? Mrs. Assistant Secretary General.
How is it complicated,
How do you handle this situation in conflict-ridden areas, the Central African Republic, Syria, the Democratic Republic of the Congo? Because it is not only a challenge to policy fulfillment, but it is equally a challenge to UN resources who are at risk, especially the personnel in such areas. So how do you implement such policies in areas like Ituri, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in areas like Bangui, where you have a serious humanitarian situation there, in places like Damascus in Syria?
Do you know, 2 weeks ago, I was in Tacloban in the Philippines. You might recall that there was a super typhoon that hit the islands of the Philippines.
Absolutely.
A storm the like of which has never been seen before in recorded human history. And I met with the women and the young people. You know, 90,000 women will give birth in the most appalling circumstances in the next 3 months.
What are those appalling circumstances for our audience to understand?
Thank you. No hospitals, no access to doctors, no clean running water, no sanitation, no shelter, and with devastation around them, having lost family members, having lost husbands, having lost children. And I met with 50 of those women. Each of them looked me in the eye and said, it's so straightforward what we need. We need dignity. We need access to good information. We need access to medicines. We need access to a midwife. and we need to be able to choose what happens to our bodies. Whether you're in Central Africa Republic, whether you're recovering from an earthquake in Haiti, whether you're living 2 months after a typhoon, still under the tent provided by the United Nations, it's still the same. And it's the same on Wall Street in New York, and the same in the Alps of Switzerland. Women want to be in charge of what happens to their bodies. They want to give life, not face death through childbirth. And we can achieve that. It's affordable, it's doable. It only wants political leadership, community commitment, and the support and engagement of men and young men in particular.
Your 2014-2017 plan of action focuses so much on reproductive health and sexual rights.
Yes.
There are so many themes related to population. Today, we are in a world where there are 7 billion people, and it is an opportunity and at the same time a challenge. Why did you focus in that area?
We're focusing on sexual and reproductive health and rights because we know the future of the world is going to be far better served if young women are not lost to child marriage, if they're not lost to early pregnancy, if women can decide to space their births, if we can keep young women and young men in schools and have young people enter adulthood with their creativity and their potential intact. That's the greatest gift to the world. The other message that we are pressing into the next development goals, which the international community is currently discussing, is the real threat to the future of the planet lies in consumption. And it lies in greed, and it lies in corruption, and it lies in the lack of the rule of law. It's not a problem of fertility that threatens the world as much as a problem of greed. Now, we can address fertility by empowering women. That's straightforward. It's been done in Rwanda. It's been done in Ethiopia. We can do it in Bangladesh. But we need the rest of the world to step up to addressing the deeper problems that the world faces with regards to unsustainable consumption of the resources of this planet.
You bring to the United Nations 20 years of community experience from Australia. You have worked at the Royal Women's Hospital. You have worked with your government. You are in charge of programming at the United Nations. And one major criticism of UN actions, especially when it comes to developing countries, Cameroon included, is that the ideas are so good on paper, but when it comes to realizing them, there is a mismatch. What accounts for this mismatch or mismarriage between good UN ideas, policies, strategies, and the realities on the field? It seems if we don't approach.
We have a lot to learn, don't we, about how to be effective as human beings in our solidarity with each other. I'm delighted to say that we're succeeding in so many places, but you know, the UN doesn't succeed on any front on its own.
When it comes to maternal mortality reduction, for example, which is your area of concern, what are some of those countries that you can be proud of, especially in Africa, rated everywhere as that area?
Do you know,
where
the United Nations can't achieve anything on its own. Wherever we're achieving, and we are achieving wonderful things, it's in partnership with government.
Okay.
Look at the data on Ethiopia. Look at the data on Rwanda. Look at the transformation of South Africa. Look at the hopes we have for Kenya. Look at the leadership that was expressed to us in our meeting with the Prime Minister of Cameroon. If we're to save the lives of women who currently are at risk of dying from pregnancy, if we're to enable every young person to reach their potential, the world needs powerful, courageous leadership. The world needs investment in budgets. The world needs a commitment to move from policy through program to delivery on the ground. And our real accountability must be to every man, woman and child, every young person and adolescent in each village, township, city and capital of every country on this great continent. When every woman can say to us, I have access to the services I need. When every young person says, I understand my body. I know how to avoid sexually transmitted infection. When every young woman is not afraid of forced marriage or female genital mutilation, then we will have done our job. That's the real test.
This 2013 report on the state of world population, which focuses on adolescent pregnancy and the girl child in particular, it's a very damaging report on the situation globally and especially to developing areas of the world, Africa, Asia, and somehow Latin America.
Yes.
I want to know from you, you have two key actors with whom you network, governments and civil society, non-governmental organizations. Where do you find satisfaction most? Working with civil society organizations or with governments?
We need them both, don't we? You know, we cannot act without governments. Governments have the mandate, the legitimation. They are enabled to, they can put policies in place. They can uphold the law. They can provide the resources. We cannot work without the government. But every government in the world that's performing well is performing well because they have a rich and vibrant civil society that helps them keep accountable.
So how do you speed up the activities in countries with snail work administrations?
Yesterday, here in Yaoundé, we announced to the Prime Minister that we will give an additional $5 million a year to the government of Cameroon this year and next year, so that's 10 million in total, to enable the government to implement its strategies. In Cameroon, we have wonderful strategies to eliminate maternal mortality, to reduce the incidence of gender-based violence, to increase gender empowerment. What we don't have are the resources that the government requires. We urge the government to adjust budget priorities, to swing in behind those strategies, and we stand ready to be in partnership with them for that purpose. So our $5 million this year will go to birth spacing, it will go to commodities, contraceptives, and it will go to providing people with the information and services they need to make an informed choice so that they can choose when to have children, choose how many to have, and do so in safety and dignity.
Two or one question before we separate. You mentioned the word contraceptives, and I was coming to that.
Yes.
You have certain establishments, organizations like the Catholic Church, especially the traditional part of it, yes, that does not accept the use of all of these. Now, how do you convince communities across the world and say, hey guys, we need this to make things move forward? Because there are traditionalists, and you need to take them out of that traditional box.
Let us look at the fertility rate of Italy. One of the most publicly recognized Catholic, or countries with the largest Catholic community, has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, and one of the oldest populations as a consequence. Let us look at Malaysia. Let us look at Indonesia. Strong efforts by government to give contraceptive choices to their people, but they are also observant of Islam. There is no one position of people of belief when it comes to protecting the integrity of the body. The United Nations Population Fund observes human rights. Human rights protect the belief. The freedom to believe what you believe is your fundamental human right. You cannot impose that on anyone else. And you certainly cannot deprive another person from choosing when to have a child just because it's against what you think is important. My belief cannot be imposed on you. You cannot impose your belief on me. And the United Nations Population Fund is in the business of creating choices. And choices dignify, puts the power back in your hands, how you want to live your life.
You are talking of human rights. Let me just take one aspect which concerns the United Nations Population Fund, the issue of sexual rights. Mm-hmm. It is a concept, to my understanding, which is well understood in the so-called industrialized communities of the globe. Just break it down to our contemporary African audience. When you talk of sexual rights, what are you talking about? Because I would tell you that, okay, it's another Women's Day that we have not even digested, that they are bringing to us again.
When we talk to the young people of Africa in more than 50 countries across the continent, and we ask young people what do they want, they want to be able to mature into their sexual adulthood people in the prime of their reproductive and sexual lives.
Which is that? Can I have an idea of the age bracket?
If you think about the onset of puberty as, say, roughly 10, and you think about the onset of adulthood, roughly 20 or so, and you think about what can happen in those 10 years. For too many young people, those 10 years are an attack on them, an assault on them, rather than a time of maturing, of empowerment, and of dignity. Child marriage, non-consensual sex, sexual violence, female genital mutilation, pregnancy before you can choose to be pregnant, and pregnant in a way that threatens your body. That is against the human rights that must be embedded in sexual and reproductive health. Those are the human rights abuses the United Nations is committed to preventing, and the United Nations Population Fund has programs right in partnership with governments around the world to ensure that those rights, instead of being abused, the right to dignity, the right to information, the right to choice is held and upheld for every woman, every child, every young person.
Final thought, and which is on a challenge. This is a statistic compiled by PRI, which is a think tank. Cancer kills about 4 million people. Tuberculosis, 1.1 million people. Malaria, 71,000. HIV and AIDS, 2.1. That is the death rate. Now look at funding. Tuberculosis, slightly above $9 million. Malaria, $1.3 billion. I had a guest last year on this program who told me that to eradicate malaria or combat it, you need about $5 billion annually. HIV and AIDS, $6.2 billion. How will the United Nations Population Fund convince the world that in this period of increasing troubles and reducing resources, she is still a force to reckon with?
Because every young person knows we're relevant. Every woman who has ever faced the prospect of unwanted pregnancy knows we're essential. Every mother who has ever given birth in great suffering and without skilled attendance care knows that without the United Nations Population Fund, the world is diminished. These are the most essential needs of the human condition, that we live our lives sexually and in terms of reproduction, in health and in dignity. No woman should ever see pregnancy as a death sentence. No woman should ever face giving birth as if it were a death penalty. This is unacceptable. And we believe that we stand for the most intimate of human rights. The rights to dignity in the bedroom, the rights to dignity in marriage, the rights to dignity in the family. And we believe this is the responsibility of everybody with power to make a difference.
UN Assistant Secretary General and the Deputy Executive Director for Programming of the United Nations Population Fund, thanks very much for accepting to be guest on our program, Globewatch.
It's an honor, Charles. Thank you.